Everyone has their favorite Metal Gear game, but when it comes to fan polls, forums, and social media, one title always seems to rise to the top. Despite not being the highest selling entry in the series, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater holds a special place in the hearts of fans. But what is it about this game that makes it the one that fans consistently return to? Why does it stand out as a fan favorite in the Metal Gear legacy? Well, for one, Metal Gear Solid 3 is often seen as a return to form after the bait and switch that was Metal Gear Solid 2. In MGS2, fans were thrown for a loop when they found themselves playing as Raiden instead of Solid Snake after the Tanker chapter. At the time, it felt like a betrayal to many who were invested in Snake's story. While Raiden has certainly carved out his own fanbase over the years, back then, many players felt cheated out of what they expected to be a true Metal Gear experience. MGS3 corrected that by bringing Snake back. But not just any Snake. In MGS3, you control Naked Snake, a younger version of Big Boss. He's not the legendary mercenary we've heard stories about in earlier games, he's a man on the rise, far from the mythic figure he ends up becoming. There's a certain rawness to Naked Snake that seems to resonate with fans. He's vulnerable, often even more so than Solid Snake is, and he doesn't have the wealth of experience the older Big Boss has yet. He's still just John, a soldier, a man. Seeing his story unfold is definitely part of the appeal that pulls fans in. Despite the path to villainy we know he ends up taking, you just cannot help but root for him during the course of MGS3. Speaking of the story, Metal Gear Solid 3's narrative is essentially the antithesis of Metal Gear Solid 2. While it took years for fans to appreciate Metal Gear Solid 2's bold narrative choices, requiring players to have intimate knowledge of the first Metal Gear Solid, MGS3 is far more accessible. You could hand MGS3 to someone who's never played a Metal Gear game, and they'd likely still enjoy the story. It's a somewhat simple to understand tale of a man given an impossible task, betrayed and beaten down, used as a pawn by several forces, yet still persevering, no matter the cost. On top of that, the game's Cold War era setting, along with its clear homages to classic espionage films like James Bond, provide a rich atmosphere that resonates with fans across generations. The mix of tense geopolitical intrigue, spy thriller action, and emotional storytelling creates a unique experience that feels timeless. Whether you're a fan of Metal Gear or you just love a good Cold War era tale, MGS3 delivers an experience that players just can't seem to forget. This is also largely due to the game's legendary musical score. Even gamers who aren't super familiar with Metal Gear know about Snake Eater's main theme. The score beautifully complements the emotional highs of the game and even the moment-to-moment gameplay sections with music that harkens back to 60s Cold War espionage films. All of this is well and good, but how does the game actually play? After all, players need to brave their way through the jungle in order to progress the game and get the chance to see this beautiful story unfold. Well, Metal Gear Solid 3 made some major strides in that department as well. When players think of actually playing Metal Gear, they often think of stealth, strategy, and the tension of evading detection. Metal Gear Solid 3 ditches the high-tech gadgets and sprawling urban environments of previous titles, instead placing you in the harsh, unforgiving jungles of Seleno Yars. The game shifts its focus from the advanced technology we associate with Metal Gear to a more primitive, survival-focused approach. Weapons and equipment are all OSP, meaning you're on your own, forced to rely on the environment and your own wits. Whether you're sneaking past enemy soldiers or surviving the wilderness, the game challenges you to think creatively and adapt to your surroundings. Metal Gear Solid 3 was also the first Metal Gear that allowed you to see those surroundings in a whole new way. The first couple of Metal Gear Solid games, as well as Metal Gear Solid 3 at launch, featured a fixed camera in an almost top-down view of Snake and the map. This all changed after Metal Gear Solid 3's Special Edition, named Subsistence, launched a year later. Among a slew of new features was the brand new over-the-shoulder camera. This mode allowed the players to actually move the camera freely around Snake in order to look around his immediate surroundings. This was seen as a huge improvement over the fixed camera and became the new series standard in future titles. Another major change MGS3 made to the Metal Gear formula is the removal of the Soliton radar. Inevitably, when a new player begins their Metal Gear journey, they tend to focus more on the radar than the actual game in order to keep an eye on enemy sightlines and avoid detection. This takes away from the map design and from taking in the actual environment. Since an important aspect aspect of Metal Gear Solid 3 is its jungle map and setting. Taking this tool away was a great idea. Players are forced to use their own senses and the few tools the game hands you in order to stay out of sight. The new mechanics go beyond just keeping Snake hidden, however. Players have to manage Snake's health, stamina, and even his diet. You can hunt animals, forage for food, and treat injuries, something that added a new level of immersion and tension. Getting hit by a bullet isn't just a matter of taking damage and then using a ration. You actually need to treat your wounds. Not keeping track of these important systems seriously hinders Snake's ability to recover from injuries, keep his stamina up, and even aim his weapon. This adds another layer of depth to MGS3 that just isn't there in the games that came before it. The camouflage system also changed how players approach stealth in a Metal Gear game. Instead of relying solely on shadows and hiding behind objects, you had to match your outfit to the environment. The game offered a vast array of camo patterns, which encouraged experimentation and added a layer of strategic depth. Changing your camo to better reflect that of the current environment surrounding Snake raises your camo index. The higher the index, the better Snake is hidden, and the smaller the chance enemies will spot him. Your camo rating also depends on Snake's positioning and whether he's moving, adding more layers of strategy. Some of these camo patterns are so strong that they can offer the player different ways to approach harder sneaking sections of the game. But the gameplay isn't just about staying hidden in the jungle. It's also about confronting some of the most memorable bosses in gaming history. Metal Gear as a series is known for its iconic boss fights. In MGS3, the boss battles take on an entirely new level of depth and creativity. From the emotional confrontation with the boss to the unique challenges posed by characters like the End and the Fury, each fight is more than just a simple battle of reflexes. These encounters are tied to the story and themes of the game, forcing players to think differently and adapt to each boss's unique abilities. The fight with the End, for example, is a sniper duel that can play out over the course of hours, making it one of the most memorable and tense confrontations in the entire series. What really sets MGS3 apart is how all of these gameplay elements are woven seamlessly into the narrative. The survival mechanics and boss fights don't feel tacked on. They serve to enhance the story. Snake's vulnerability is mirrored in the gameplay, forcing players to experience what it might actually feel like to be in his shoes while in this hostile environment. Downing a boss almost feels like you've conquered their respective emotion, bringing Snake and the player one step closer to becoming the soldier they need to be in order to complete this mission. When we talk about Metal Gear Solid 3, we can't overlook the sheer emotional weight that defines the game. To truly understand why the story resonates so deeply with fans, we need to look at how MGS3 came to be and how its narrative was crafted. Unlike previous Metal Gear games, which were often steeped in high-tech espionage, MGS3 took a step in a different direction by setting the story in the Cold War era 1960s, a time of global tension and secrecy. This period of history provided a rich backdrop for the game's themes of betrayal, loyalty, and sacrifice. The emotional climax of the game is undeniably the final battle with the boss. It's not just a boss fight, it's a tragic culmination of everything the game has been building toward. The connection between Snake and the boss, built on years of shared history, training, and trust, is tested in a moment of ultimate sacrifice. The boss's death at Snake's and the player's hands isn't just the end of another boss. It's the shattering of everything Snake thought he knew about loyalty, duty, and love. The weight of this moment lingers long after the credits roll. In fact, this one moment causes a ripple effect throughout the entirety of the Metal Gear saga. Everything that happens after this moment happens because of the boss's sacrifice. Those who followed her were left with a warped version of her will, and ultimately, this misinterpretation of her will served as the catalyst for Big Boss, turning into the darker figure we know he ends up becoming. What makes this relationship so powerful is how it reflects the larger themes of the game. Snake's journey is about growing up, about learning the brutal truths of the world he lives in. The boss represents everything Snake has to let go of in order to become the man he's destined to be: a leader, a hero, and eventually, a villain. It's a painful transformation, one that players can't help but empathize with. No matter how much we know about Big Boss's future actions in the Metal Gear series, we can't help but feel the loss of the boss and mourn for Snake's innocence as it slips away. It's easy to see why most Metal Gear fans feel the way that they do about Metal Gear Solid 3. It's a game with an emotional story at its core that everyone can relate to, or at the very least, empathize with. Although I personally always suggest new players to the series to start with either the MSX games or the very first Metal Gear Solid, MGS3 is admittedly a great alternative entry point. It's the genesis of the entire story. It's the player's first chance to play as the legendary Big Boss we've heard so much about and even faced off against in previous entries. It's an entry that improved and expanded on the series' gameplay up until that point and provided a different aesthetic to what players were accustomed to. I, for one, am very excited to re-experience this amazing game with a fresh coat of paint once Delta releases. If you're planning to get your Foxhound playthrough done before Delta, I have a detailed guide that has helped a ton of players achieve this prestigious rating. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.